Order in the court. Who let this man in here? Security. Your Honor, that's my daughter. She wanted me dead.
Your Honor.
I apologize. Everything they did to me is inside this envelope. Before you open this, Your Honor, you deserve to know what my daughter did to me. My name is Richard Blackwood, and before you judge my daughter, you need to hear what she did to me.
My name is Richard Blackwood, and if someone had told me 3 years ago that my own daughter would one day want me dead, I would have laughed in their face. Emily wasn't just my daughter. She was my whole world. After my wife passed away, she became the only reason I woke up every morning. I gave her everything a father could give: love, trust, the best education, and a life most people could only dream of. We lived in a beautiful home just outside Boston. I owned a successful construction company that I had, built from nothing over 35 years. Every brick of that company carried my sweat, my sacrifices, and my family's future. Emily never had to worry about money. She drove the car she wanted, traveled wherever she wished, and if she ever asked me for anything, my answer was always yes. People often told me, "Richard, you're spoiling your daughter." I'd just smile and say, "She's all I have left." Looking back now, I wish I had listened to them, because the biggest mistake of my life wasn't trusting strangers. It was believing that blood could never betray blood. Everything changed on the day Emily introduced me to a man named Daniel Carter. She smiled and said, "Dad, I want you to meet someone special." The moment I shook his hand, something inside me felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Daniel smiled politely, looked me straight in the eyes, and spoke with confidence. On the surface, he seemed like the perfect gentleman. He told me he was building a technology company and had big dreams for the future. Emily looked happier than I had seen her in years. Seeing that smile on my daughter's face, I pushed my doubts aside. Over the next few months, Daniel became a regular visitor in my home. He always called me Mr. Blackwood with respect. He offered to help around the house, joined me for dinner, and even asked about my business. Slowly, he earned my trust. But there was one thing that kept bothering me. Every time Daniel looked at my company, my house, or my investments, his eyes changed. It wasn't admiration, it was hunger. At the time, I ignored it. I thought I was just being an overprotective father. I had no idea that Daniel wasn't falling in love with my daughter. He was falling in love with everything I owned. A few weeks later, I started noticing small changes in Emily. She wasn't the same daughter who used to sit with me every evening over coffee. She stopped asking how my day had been. She stopped laughing at my old jokes. Sometimes she'd disappear for hours without telling me where she was. And whenever I asked, she'd simply say, "Dad, you worry too much." At first, I blamed myself. Maybe she was just growing up. Maybe I was finding it hard to accept that my little girl was becoming an independent woman. But then, one evening, I walked past the living room and heard Daniel's voice. He didn't know I was home. I couldn't hear every word, but one sentence stopped me in my tracks. "The sooner he signs everything, the easier it will be." A second later, Emily quickly whispered, "Keep your voice down. Dad might hear us." I froze. My heart started beating faster. The moment they heard my footsteps, the conversation ended. When I entered the room, both of them smiled as if nothing had happened. Daniel stood up, shook my hand, and calmly said, "Mr. Blackwood, we were just talking about our future." I smiled back. But deep inside, for the first time, I realized that something wasn't right, and that uneasy feeling was only the beginning of the nightmare that was about to destroy my family. From that day on, I started paying attention to the little things. Daniel was always around. If Emily needed groceries, Daniel was there. If she wanted to go somewhere, Daniel drove her. If I invited Emily to dinner, she'd say, "Sorry, Dad." Daniel already made plans. It felt like I was slowly losing my daughter. One Sunday morning, I asked Emily if she'd have breakfast with me. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Maybe next week, Dad." An hour later, I looked out the kitchen window. She wasn't at work. She wasn't with friends. She was laughing in Daniel's car. They drove away together. Without saying goodbye, that afternoon, I decided to visit my company's headquarters. When I arrived, the receptionist smiled awkwardly. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Emily and Mr. Carter were here earlier today. I frowned. Why? They said you asked them to review some financial documents. My smile disappeared. I never asked anyone to do that. The receptionist's face turned pale. I'm sorry, sir. They said they had your permission. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Emily had never lied to me before. Not once. So why was she suddenly pretending to have my authority? I walked straight to my office. Nothing looked out of place. But something told me. Someone had been sitting in my chair, touching my files, looking through my private records. At that moment, I still believed there had to be a simple explanation. I had no idea that my daughter and the man she trusted most had already taken the first step in a plan that would nearly cost me my life. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. It was raining hard that evening. I had just finished a meeting at the office and was driving home. The roads were almost empty. Then, out of nowhere, a black pickup truck sped through a red light. It came straight at my car. I slammed on the brakes. The impact was so violent. My car spun across the highway before crashing into the guardrail. The airbags exploded. Glass shattered everywhere. For a few seconds, everything went black. When I finally opened my eyes, I could taste blood. My phone was lying on the floor. With shaking hands, I dialed Emily. Once, twice, 3 times. She never answered. I left her a voicemail. Emily, I've been in an accident. Please, call me back. Then I called Daniel. He looked after Emily so often that I thought maybe he was with her. He rejected the call. Not once, but twice. An ambulance arrived a few minutes later. As the paramedics pulled me from the wreckage, one of the police officers walked over. He looked at my damaged car, then quietly asked, Mr. Blackwood, has anyone been threatening you recently? I stared at him. Why would you ask me that? The officer hesitated for a moment. Then he pointed toward the road behind us. There were no skid marks. The pickup truck had never tried to stop, and before anyone could identify it, it disappeared into the night. At that moment, I convinced myself it was just a hit and run. I wanted to believe it was an accident, because accepting the truth would have meant believing someone actually wanted me dead, and I wasn't ready to believe that. Not yet. 3 days later, I was finally discharged from the hospital. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. They called it a miracle. I called it another chance. When I arrived home, the house felt strangely empty. Emily wasn't there. There wasn't even a note. I sat alone in my study, trying to convince myself that maybe she was just busy. Then my phone rang. It was Emily. For a brief moment, I smiled. I thought she was finally calling to ask if I was okay. I answered immediately, Emily. Before I could say another word, she interrupted me. Daniel and I need to talk to you. Her voice was cold, almost emotionless. Can you come to the house tomorrow morning? I paused. Of course. Is everything all right? There was complete silence. Then she quietly replied, You'll understand tomorrow. The call ended. The next morning, I walked into my own living room and instantly knew something was wrong. Emily was sitting on the couch. Daniel sat beside her. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them stood up. There was a thick stack of legal papers on the coffee table. Daniel slowly pushed the documents toward me. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Blackwood, it's time for you to step aside. I looked at Emily, waiting for her to tell me this was some kind of joke. Instead, she lowered her eyes and whispered the words that shattered my heart. Dad, I think it's time you signed everything over. I stared at the documents in complete disbelief. My hands were still bruised from the accident. My ribs still hurt every time I took a breath. And yet, the first thing my daughter wanted from me was my signature. I slowly picked up the first page. It wasn't a simple authorization. It was a transfer of control. If I signed those papers, Emily would gain legal authority over my company, my properties, my investments, everything I had spent 35 years building. I looked at her. Emily, where did these papers come from? She hesitated before she could answer. Daniel spoke for her. A family attorney prepared them. I looked directly into his eyes. I didn't ask any attorney to prepare anything. Daniel leaned back in his chair. You're getting older, Mr. Blackwood. Managing a business this size isn't easy anymore. I ignored him. My eyes never left my daughter. Emily, do you really believe I should give away everything I've worked for? For a brief second, I saw tears forming in her eyes. I thought she was about to apologize. I thought my little girl was finally coming back. Instead, she quietly nodded. Dad, Daniel is only trying to protect us. Those words cut deeper than the accident ever could, because they weren't Daniel's words anymore. They were hers. I placed the papers back on the table and calmly stood up. I'm not signing anything. The smile disappeared from Daniel's face. He leaned forward, his voice colder than ever before. "Mr. Blackwood, you can sign these papers today." He paused, then looked directly into my eyes. "Or we'll make sure you never get the chance again." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The room was silent. I looked at Daniel, then at Emily. Neither of them looked away. I picked up my coat, walked toward the front door, and before leaving, I turned back one last time. "Emily, if your mother were alive today, she'd be heartbroken." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but Daniel immediately placed his hand on her shoulder, almost as if he was reminding her whose side she was on. I quietly walked out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept asking myself the same question. What happened to my daughter? She wasn't raised to be this person. Someone had changed her. The next morning, I made a decision. Instead of going to the office, I hired a private investigator. His name was Jack Morrison, a retired homicide detective with nearly 30 years of experience. I handed him one photograph. Daniel Carter. Jack looked at the picture for only a few seconds. Then his expression changed. He looked back at me and asked, "Mr. Blackwood, are you absolutely sure this man is dating your daughter?" I frowned. "Why?" Jack remained silent for a moment. Then he slowly slid the photograph back across the table. "Because I've seen this face before. In the last family he became involved with." He paused. His voice grew quieter, ended with a funeral. Jack Morrison wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. He had spent nearly 30 years investigating murders, fraud and organized crime. He had seen innocent people accused and guilty people walk free. If Jack said something felt wrong, I listened. He placed Daniel's photograph on his desk and stared at it for several seconds before speaking again. "Mr. Blackwood, before I tell you anything, I need you to answer one question. How much does your daughter actually know about this man?" I sighed. "She thinks he's the love of her life." Jack slowly shook his head. "Then I'm afraid she's in far more danger than she realizes." Those words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" Jack opened an old filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder covered in dust. The name on the folder wasn't Daniel Carter. It was another name entirely. David Collins. I frowned. "Who's David Collins?" Jack looked directly into my eyes. The same man, just a different name. For a moment, I couldn't process what he had just said. "You're telling me Daniel Carter isn't even his real name?" Jack nodded. "Not even close." He spread dozens of photographs across the desk. Every photo showed the same man, just with different hairstyles, different clothes, even different beards. But it was him, Daniel, or whatever his real name was. Jack continued, "Over the last 12 years, this man has used at least 5 different identities. He moves from state to state, targets wealthy families, builds relationships and disappears once the money is gone." I felt my hands begin to shake. "Has he ever been arrested?" Jack sighed. "Several times. But every witness disappeared or suddenly changed their testimony." He handed me another photograph. It showed Daniel standing beside an elderly businessman. The man looked happy, trusting, exactly the way I had looked only months earlier. "Who is he?" I asked. Jack's expression became heavy. "His name was William Harper. 6 months after this photo was taken, Mr. Harper died in what police called a boating accident." I stared at the photograph. Then another. Every picture showed Daniel smiling beside a different wealthy family, different daughters, different fathers, different cities, but always the same ending. Jack leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Richard, I don't think your daughter is the mastermind. I think she's the next victim. For the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped thinking about my money. I stopped thinking about my company. I thought about Emily, my little girl, who might already be trapped by a man far more dangerous than either of us had imagined. And at that very moment, neither Jack nor I realized, Daniel was already watching my house, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make sure I never discovered the rest of the truth. That night, I didn't go home. For the first time in years, I was afraid. Not for my money, not for my company, for my life, Jack insisted. "I stay at a small motel on the other side of town until he finished investigating." Daniel's passed. Before leaving, he looked me straight in the eyes. "Richard, don't tell anyone where you're staying, not even Emily." Those words broke my heart. The fact that I couldn't even trust my own daughter was something I never imagined I'd experience. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. I answered immediately. "Emily, are you okay?" Her voice sounded different, She was crying. "Dad, where are you?" I almost told her, but Jack's warning echoed in my mind. "Why are you asking?" There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "I just want to know if you're safe." For a brief moment, I believed her. I almost gave her the motel's address. But something stopped me. Instead, I replied, "I'm fine. I'll see you in a few days." She suddenly became nervous. "No, Dad, tell me where you are." I frowned. "Emily, what's going on?" Before she could answer, the call disconnected. I tried calling back. Her phone was switched off. I barely slept that night. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Jack called. The moment I answered, I knew something terrible had happened. "Richard, don't go home." My heart started racing. "Why?" Jack took a deep breath. "Because someone broke into your house an hour ago." I jumped to my feet. "What?" "The security system was disabled. Every room was searched. Your office was completely destroyed." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Did they steal anything?" Jack's voice became even quieter. "No, it doesn't look like they were looking for money. They were looking for something else." "What?" There was a pause. Then Jack said the words that made my blood run cold. "Richard, whoever broke into your house was searching for proof that they're being investigated." I froze. That meant only one thing. Daniel somehow knew. Someone was getting close to the truth. Jack wasn't finished. "There's something else. One of the neighbors' security cameras recorded a black SUV leaving your property. We're enhancing the footage now. If we're lucky, we'll finally know who was behind it." I looked out the motel window. The parking lot was completely empty, or so I thought. Just as I was about to close the curtain, a pair of headlights slowly turned on. A black SUV was parked directly across the street, and someone inside was watching my room. I didn't move. I stood behind the motel curtain, barely breathing. The black SUV remained parked across the street. Its headlights were on, but the windows were too dark to see inside. I immediately whispered into the phone, "Jack, they're here." He didn't sound surprised. "Stay away from the windows. Lock the door." "I'm calling the police now." I quietly stepped back, turned off every light in the room, and waited. Every second felt like an hour. Then my phone vibrated again. A text message. "Unknown number." I opened it. There were only 5 words. "We know you're still alive." My heart almost stopped. No one knew where I was. Not Emily, not my employees, not even my closest friends. Only Jack. I looked at the message again. Then another text arrived. This one contained a photograph. It was taken only minutes earlier. From outside my motel, it showed me standing at the window. Someone had been watching me the entire time. I immediately dropped to the floor. Jack shouted through the phone, "Richard, stay down." A second later, the motel room window exploded. Glass flew across the room. Someone had fired a shot. I crawled behind the bed as another loud bang echoed through the parking lot. Outside, tires screeched. Police sirens grew louder. The black SUV accelerated and disappeared into the darkness. 10 minutes later, the police searched the entire area, but the SUV was gone. One officer picked up a damaged bullet from the motel wall. He looked at me and quietly said, "Mr. Blackwood, whoever did this didn't come here to scare you. They came here to finish what they started." I sat there in complete silence. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me for days. "Do you think my daughter knows about this?" No one answered. Even Jack couldn't, because if Emily knew, then I had already lost my daughter. But if she didn't, then she was living with a man capable of murder. As we prepared to leave the motel, Jack's phone suddenly rang. He listened for a few seconds. Then his face turned pale. He slowly looked at me. "Richard, we've just identified the driver of the black SUV." I held my breath. "Who was it?" Jack hesitated, then quietly replied, "Your daughter's car was following right behind it." I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Emily's car? I looked at Jack, hoping he would tell me there had been some mistake. He didn't. Instead, he handed me a traffic camera photograph. There it was, the black SUV driving down the highway, and less than 30 feet behind it, Emily's silver BMW. I stared at the picture for what felt like forever. There has to be an explanation. Jack nodded slowly. "I hope you're right, because if you're wrong, this case just became much darker." The next morning, Jack arranged for us to watch every traffic camera recording from that night, frame by frame, minute by minute. At first, nothing looked unusual. Emily's car simply followed the SUV. But then, one particular video changed everything. The SUV pulled into an abandoned warehouse. Emily followed it inside. The security camera recorded both vehicles entering, but only one vehicle came back out. The black SUV, Emily's BMW, never left. I looked at Jack. What does that mean? He leaned back in his chair. It means your daughter stayed there for almost 3 hours. 3 hours in the middle of the night at an abandoned warehouse with the same people who had just tried to kill me. My chest tightened. Every instinct told me to drive there immediately, but Jack grabbed my arm. Richard, that's exactly what they want. If they're willing to shoot at you, they're willing to do worse. That afternoon, we obtained a search warrant for the warehouse. Police officers entered first. Jack and I waited outside. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Finally, one detective walked toward us, carrying a cardboard evidence box. We found this hidden in one of the offices. Inside were fake driver's licenses, forged passports, blank property transfer documents, and dozens of prepaid cell phones. But one item caught my attention. A leather notebook. Jack carefully opened it. Every page contained names, addresses, bank account numbers, property values. It wasn't a diary. It was a target list. Each wealthy family had been carefully documented. Some names were crossed out. Others were highlighted. Then I saw my own name, Richard Blackwood. Beside it, someone had written in red ink, Step 1, gain the daughter's trust. Step 2, isolate the father. Step 3, transfer the assets. Step 4, I couldn't breathe as I read the final line, make sure he never comes back. At that moment, I realized something that broke my heart more than anything else. My daughter hadn't met Daniel by chance. He had chosen her, long before she ever knew his name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the notebook we had recovered from the warehouse. My name, my address, even the value of my company. Every detail of my life had been carefully planned. But one question kept haunting me. Was Emily helping Daniel, or was she another victim? I needed an answer. The next morning, Jack called me. Richard, I found your daughter. Where is she? At Riverside Park. She's meeting Daniel. Within minutes, we were parked across the street in an unmarked car. Jack handed me a pair of binoculars. Stay inside the vehicle. Whatever happens, don't let them see you. I looked across the park. Emily was sitting alone on a wooden bench. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying all night. 5 minutes later, Daniel arrived. He didn't hug her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He looked angry, very angry. He leaned toward her and started talking. We couldn't hear every word, but we could read their body language. Emily shook her head. Again and again. She kept saying, no. Daniel suddenly slammed his hand onto the bench. Several people in the park turned to look. Emily flinched. For the first time, I saw fear in my daughter's eyes. Not fear of me, fear of him. Jack quietly whispered, do you still think he's just a businessman? I couldn't answer. Then something unexpected happened. Emily reached into her purse and handed Daniel a small flash drive. Daniel grabbed it immediately. His face changed. He smiled. Then he quietly said something. Emily suddenly began crying. She covered her face with both hands. Daniel didn't comfort her. Instead, he turned around, walked to his car, and drove away without looking back. I was about to get out of the car and run to my daughter, but Jack grabbed my arm. No, not yet. Why? Jack pointed toward the opposite side of the street. A man wearing a black baseball cap was photographing Emily with a telephoto camera. He wasn't a reporter. He wasn't a tourist. He was watching her. Watching us. Jack's expression turned serious. Richard, Daniel isn't working alone. This operation is much bigger than we thought. As we continued watching, Emily slowly stood up from the bench. She wiped away her tears, looked around to make sure no one was following her, then whispered 5 words to herself. Words that I would never forget. Dad, please forgive me. I couldn't stop thinking about the words Emily whispered in the park. Dad, please forgive me. Those 5 words changed everything. For the first time, I wasn't looking at a daughter who hated me. I was looking at a daughter who was terrified. Jack felt the same way. Richard, he said, I think she's trying to tell you something, but she's too afraid to say it. I looked at him, afraid of Daniel. Jack nodded. Men like him don't lose control easily. When they realize someone is turning against them, they become dangerous. That evening, something happened I never expected. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. There was only one text message. Don't trust anyone. Meet me alone. 11:10 p.m. St. Mark's Church. No name. No explanation. Jack immediately traced the number. It was a disposable phone. Impossible to identify. It's a trap, Jack said. Or, I replied, it's Emily. Against Jack's advice, I went, not alone. Police officers stayed hidden nearby. At exactly 11 o'clock, the old church doors slowly opened. A woman wearing a grey hoodie walked inside. She kept looking over her shoulder as she stepped into the light. My heart broke. It was Emily. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Before I could say a word, she threw her arms around me and cried harder than I'd ever seen. "I never wanted any of this. Daniel lied to me. He told me you were hiding money. He said you were going to leave me with nothing." She couldn't stop crying. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. I gently held her shoulders. "Emily, did Daniel try to kill me?" She looked down. Her entire body began shaking. Then, very slowly, she nodded. Tears streamed down her face. "He said, if you survived, he'd kill both of us." At that moment, I realized my daughter had never been my enemy. She had been living in fear. But before she could tell me everything, the church doors suddenly slammed shut. A voice echoed through the darkness. "Emily, you should have stayed loyal." The church fell completely silent. Emily grabbed my arm so tightly. I could feel her hands shaking. "Dad, he's here." A shadow slowly appeared at the far end of the church. Daniel. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked angry, cold, and completely fearless. He clapped his hands slowly. What a touching family reunion. He took another step forward. "Emily, after everything I did for you, you chose him?" Emily stepped in front of me. For the first time, she wasn't protecting Daniel. She was protecting her father. "Stay away from him." Daniel laughed. "You think the police can save you? By tomorrow morning, everyone will believe Richard Blackwood died in that accident, and no one will ever know the truth." The moment those words left his mouth, hidden police officers rushed into the church. "Police, don't move!" Daniel spun around and tried to run, but before he reached the back door, he was tackled to the ground. As officers handcuffed him, he looked directly at Emily. "You just destroyed your own life." Emily collapsed into tears. She buried her face in my shoulder. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I held my daughter tightly. For the first time in months, she felt like my little girl again. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. News reporters filled every seat. Daniel sat at the defense table in handcuffs. Emily sat beside me, not as a defendant, but as the prosecution's key witness. The judge looked toward me. "Mr. Blackwood, you may present your final evidence." I slowly stood up, picked up the sealed brown envelope, the same envelope everyone had been wondering about since the day. I walked into this courtroom. I placed it on the evidence table. Then I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, everything you need to know is inside this envelope." The courtroom became so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. The judge slowly opened the envelope, and what she found inside changed the entire case forever. Judge Eleanor Whitmore slowly opened the envelope. The entire courtroom held its breath. Inside, there wasn't just one document. There were dozens. A USB drive, bank records, insurance policies, property transfer agreements, phone records, and one handwritten letter. The judge picked up the letter first. "What is this?" I took a deep breath. "Your Honor, that's the confession Daniel forced Emily to write." Emily lowered her head and quietly began to cry. The judge continued reading. Every sentence revealed another lie, another threat, another crime. Then, the court technician inserted the USB drive into the evidence system. A video appeared on the courtroom screen. It was security camera footage from Daniel's warehouse. The date matched the night of my so-called accident. The courtroom watched in complete silence. Daniel appeared on the screen. He looked directly at 2 men standing beside the black SUV. His voice echoed through the speakers. "Make it look like an accident. If Richard survives." He paused, then smiled. "Finish the job." A loud gasp spread through the courtroom. Daniel immediately stood up. "That's fake. Someone edited that video." But before anyone could respond, the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the FBI's digital forensics laboratory has already authenticated the recording." Daniel's face instantly turned pale. The prosecutor wasn't finished. Phone records also place Mr. Carter's device at the exact location of both the warehouse and the highway where Mr. Blackwood was nearly killed. The judge slowly removed her glasses. She looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Carter, would you like to explain this evidence?" For the first time since the trial began, Daniel had nothing to say. He simply stared at the floor. The judge turned toward Emily. "Miss Blackwood, did this man threaten you?" Emily wiped away her tears, then stood before the entire courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor. He told me that if I warned my father, he would kill both of us." The courtroom fell silent once again. The judge nodded slowly, then looked toward me. Mr. Blackwood, this court is deeply sorry for everything you've endured. She picked up her gavel. Daniel Carter. I find probable cause for charges including attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and coercion. Bail is denied. The gavel struck the bench. Daniel closed his eyes. His empire of lies had collapsed in a single afternoon, but as officers led him away in handcuffs, he turned around one last time, looked directly at Emily, and smiled. It wasn't the smile of a defeated man. It was the smile of someone who still believed this story wasn't over.